Harihi Om Gajananam Bhudaganadi Sevidam Kavitta Jambho Balasara Bakshitham Umasudam Sokha Vinashakaranam Namami Vickneswara Pada Pankajam Om Gajanana Batnatkam Gajananam Maharnisham Anekadantam Bhakthanam Ekadantam Upasmahe Om Gajananam Mahakayam Viknarajam Vinayagam Vishvesham Vishvashaksham Ganeshayam Namo Namaha Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmalar Spatikhatrudhim Adaram Sarva Vidyanam Hayagrivam Upasmahe Yasyat Bharata Vakradhyaya Parishatya Parashatham Vignam Nignam Tisatatham Vishvashremam Tamashraye Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurave Sarvalokanam Bisaje Bhavaroginaha Nidaye Sarva Vidyanam Sri Dakshinamurthaye Namaha Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Sarveshwararphanamastu Sarvopanishad Ghao Doktha Gopalanandanaha Itihasancha Puranancha Doktha Geetamrutat Mahat Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Krishnarphanamastu Anyadarshanam. So we are strolling along into week 8, right? Having looked at Vishnu, Narada, Padma, Garuda, Varaha, Bhagavata, Matsya, Kurma, Linga, Shiva, Skanda, and Agni Puranas. Today we are going to look at Brahmanda Purana and Brahmavaivarta Purana, right? So what is Brahmanda Purana, right? The Brahmanda Purana is one of the 18, Mukhya Puranas, significant Puranas. And in many of the existent anthologies, it is listed as the 18th Mahapuranas, right, comparatively. Now, some of the early records refer to the Brahmanda Purana as Vayavya Purana or Vayavya Brahmanda, right? That's because of its connotations or links with the Vayu Purana, and they saw some similarities. So they also refer to it as Vayavya Purana or Vayavya Brahmanda, right? Now, Brahmanda, there's two words, Brahma and Andha, which basically means the cosmic egg. As you know, Andha, whether in Hindi or Sanskrit or some other languages, it means egg. Egg here means the cosmic egg. So Brahmandam means the grandness or the grandeur, the greatness. So when you see something huge and so overwhelming or overpowering, you say, wow, this is Brahmandam. Brahma Andam, great cosmic egg, right? It is one of the core, or as I said earlier, Mukhya Purana, and it can be traced back to somewhere in the 4th century CE, right? And what does it talk about? It talks about many things, right? And most of the Puranas, sometimes they overlap with each other. So Some of the things in the form of reiteration. Repetition reinforces understanding or comprehension. This one talks about cosmogony. It talks about sanskars, the rites of passages. It talks about gemology, gems, the different gems and what their natural power is when worn by certain people belonging to certain rashis. It also talks about dharma sanskars. It also talks about ethics. It talks about yoga. It talks about geographical issues. It talks about the maintenance of rivers. Can you imagine 4th CE? And it's talking about how rivers ought to be maintained, by the local society and, of course, the government and so on and so forth. It talks about good governance, administration. It talks about diplomacy, trade, festivals, and, of course, yatra tithas, pilgrimages, right? But the most important part of this Brahmanda Purana is the reference to the work called Lalita Sahasranama, right? Every god has, I've said before, right? You have a single line mantra, which is called the Mula mantra. You have a 3-line mantra, which is called the Gayatri mantra. And you have 4 lines or 4 lines are called suktas, or 8 lines are called ashtakams. Or you have the 108 names, they call ashtotrams. Or they have 300 names, they call Trishatinama, right? Or you have the 700 names called Shaptashati. Or you have the Sahasra, which is 1,000 names, right? Of all these, 2 stand out. 2 stand out as being the most significant, right? One is Vishnu Sahasranama, as I said, 18 days of war. The first day Bhagavad Gita was born, and on the 18th day of the war, Vishnu Sahasranama was given by Bhishma to Arjuna. Bhishma Pitamaha, Bhishmacharya. Now, the second one is Lalita Sahasranama. It has been said in the Rig Veda and repeated many times in other points of reference that if one learns to chant either the Lalita Sahasranama or the Vishnu Sahasranama, there is nothing else they need to know or learn or chant, because these 2 can take you across the ocean of samsara, from Bhuloka to Bhuvaloka, Bhuvaloka to Suvaloka, right? So they're not easy to learn, but they're not impossible. It's very, very easy to listen. If every day you listen to it for half an hour, right? After some time, you begin to sing along with it. But you should not be looking at words and reading. That's the bad way to learn, right? And unfortunately, most of the chanting these days are done like that. The eyes will see. The mind will try and, calculate the words, read the words, and therefore the chanting becomes more of a reading exercise. But in the Gurukulas, how we learned and how it was taught is there is no books, no writing implements, nothing. You'll have about 20 students sitting under the Acharya who's sitting there, the Guru. He will say, Atha Shri Lalita Sahasranama Stotra Mahamantrasya. Then the students will repeat. Twice they'll repeat. And if the correct pronunciation and all is there, fine, the master will continue. Otherwise, they will have to repeat it, as many times until they get it correct. Then 2nd line, then 3rd line, right? So 1, you improve your listening faculty, right? Because you have to focus on that. Otherwise, the master will suddenly call upon you and say, right, you repeat it now. So you have to be, on attention all the time. So that's how it was learned, and it is very, very effective learning, right? So even when I teach it like that. I said, you don't look at anything. You listen to me and you repeat twice. Because when you look, the eyes will signal to the brain, this is what it means, so read it in this way. Whereas when you hear something, and I told you many times, right, in the early days, knowledge was only transferred in 2 ways. One is Shruti, through hearing, and one is Smriti, what you can see and what you cannot see, what the divine sight can reveal to you. So Lalita Sahasranama is the center point of focus as far as the Brahmanda Purana is concerned, right? And this is also sometimes referred to, if you go to the ancient, the Hindu kingdoms, right? So if you go to Java, what is now Indonesia, there is a version of Brahmanda Purana called Javanya Brahmanda Purana, found in Bali, Indonesia. And as you know, if you read the archaeological journals, you'll find that in Indonesia, they are constantly discovering more statues below the buildings. Recently they found an entire temple just outside a university in Jakarta, right, where the granite stones of Ganesha, Shivalinga, everything is still there, preserved. Because as you know, if you read history, it will tell you that Indonesia, the Hindu-nesia has now become Indonesia, was formerly a Hindu kingdom, right? So as I said, the historical timeline is around 4th century BC, right? But many later editions, many later translations have put it, between 4th and the 6th, and some even say 7th, right? But some of the things they refer to must, obviously they could not have existed if they can refer to those kind of things. So I would say, a 4th century BC is more accurate, right? Of course, everything that is reviewed, renewed, retranslated, rewritten, everything, it changes over a period of time. So what was is not what is, and what is will not what will be, right? So you have to go back to the old almanacs, the original manuscripts. In fact, there was a Yadava dynasty scholar called Hemadri Sheshadri. He looked at it in the 12th century, and he said in his writing, he wrote many things. He made many references to Brahmanda Purana, and he says, some of these things are even existing before the 4th century BC. So, you have to take it with a pinch of salt if you're actually researching into this, right? So you have to look at the event, the timeline, what is being said, and then draw a line of rationality between that to see, yes, it does make sense, no, it doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, if you really ask me, I will say the timeline is important, not as important as the lesson that you're going to get. If you get the lesson, then why worry who wrote it and when they wrote it? Isn't it? As I always say, focus on the lesson that you are meant to get from it, not on the nitty-gritty and all the, minute details of who wrote it, when they wrote it, where they wrote it. Now, one of the other important things in this Brahmanda Purana is something called Adhyatma Ramayana. Adhyatma Ramayana, right? Is set in some of the chapters in this, and is composed, I think it was added later, the 13th or the 14th century, and is attributed to the Advaita scholar, Ramananda. Some refer to him as Ramanuja, and the founder of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, the largest monastic group in Hinduism, even in modern times, right? It's called Ramanuja Diksha. Okay. Now, again, this is also referred to in the Javanese Brahmanda, which is more in the form of a palm leaf manuscript. The early days, they didn't have papers, so many things were written on the palm leaves. And this is what they discovered in Indonesia when, one of the archaeological trips. I have seen one or two parts of the Brahmanda Purana, but it is reported that the Sanskrit originals of the actual Brahmanda Purana have been lost or cannot be traced, but there are some little parts here and there still existing. So I've seen one or two parts in Kashi, but, the whole book as such, you don't know. You've lost it. It may have been stolen and taken to out of India, those kind of things. But many of the modern translations have been sourced from the Javanese Brahmanda. It's been taken to Europe by the Dutch scholars, by the German scholars, by the Danish scholars. And of course, they then compared that to whatever they could find having existence in India. And they said, yeah, the Vedic literature clearly shows the link between what was written in the Javanese Brahmanda, the palm leaf manuscripts, and of course, what was available in India at that time. So you can sort of roughly guess, right, that wherever you find this literature, they owe their existence to the Matrubhava, goes back to Bharata, goes back to India. Because from there only it has all come. And of course, dispersed here, there, everywhere, because, people come, take and go. People come, take and go. And if you are not protecting it, then people will take whatever we have, we've lost it, right? And it goes there and it goes through some other process and it's been repackaged and resold as something else. So as I said, the original version of the Brahmanda Purana is non-traceable, or we don't know where it is, right? But modern day scholars have been able to put things together, right? And they've come up with something called the Brahmanda Purana, not in its original form, but the content relates to what was originally written. So basically, the Brahmanda Purana has got, in terms of structure, it's got three parts, right? Three bhagas or parts. The first part has got two divisions, while the other two have just one pada each. Okay, so the first bhaga has 38 Ithihasas or chapters. The second one has got 74 chapters, and the third and the fourth have got 44 each. So cumulatively, you have about 156 chapters. Now, amongst these, 19 chapters have been referred to our good old friend Nachiketa. As if you remember, and if you followed my Upanishads satsangs, I did 18 weeks, 15 weeks, I can't remember, of Upanishads. One of the Upanishads I spoke about was Katha Upanishad, right? I spoke about all the 15 major Upanishads. One of them was Katha Upanishad. When I spoke to you about Katha Upanishad, I spoke to you about Nachiketa. This reference to Nachiketa also comes in the Brahmanda Purana, referred to in 19 chapters as Nachiketa Pakyana. Nachiketa Pakyana. So they say it has about, the whole Brahmanda Purana has about 12 to 13,000 verses. But if you look at the modern print, in 18th century or 19th century or even the 20th century, they have added stuff here and there. So you get about 14,500 verses, give or take. But the Indonesian version, the Javanese version is much shorter. And it is not as superfluous as, the Indian versions are. So this basically tells you that something, when taken off and taken somewhere else, may not be presented in the same way, may be much more abbreviated or much more brief. But the focus of the content is two questions: violence or non-violence? Which way? And which way will get you where, right? So that's the main focus. And in focusing on that, they refer to many things, right? Nachiketa was one of them. Ahimsa, it has been mentioned in Brahmanda Purana, is the gateway to dharma, right? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So if you want to hit dharma, first you must practice ahimsa. Ahimsa, non-violence. Non-violence means, it doesn't mean taking arms in your hands. Non-violence in your thoughts, non-violence in your words, and non-violence in your deeds or actions, right? That is the gateway to dharma. And then once you're at the dharmic level of living, right, then you acquire whatever you want, material acquisitions. What do you need, not what you want, right? More question of what you need through dharmic means. Then karma and moksha, later. Avoid retaliating. As I always say, do not react, but rather respond, because the difference between reaction does not have a thought process between what was said and what you are going to repeat or what you call react. Whereas response always gives you that short pausation before you say something or do something. So always avoid retaliating by way of reaction, but respond instead, having given you yourself that brief moment to quickly think. You don't have to say anything all the time. You don't have to say something all the time. Sometimes silence is the best weapon. And then the Brahmanda Purana says, when you don't retaliate, when you remain silent, even on the face of blame, when you know you haven't done it, I mean, there's nothing for you to defend. Or unless, of course, you're charged in court, that's a separate matter. But avoid retaliating. It is the way to moksha. Okay. And the question arises, can you take up arms to defend dharma? Or is it permissible? Or is it punishable when faced with war or violence? For example, if by killing one, you are giving life to many, right? If by killing one, many can lead a happy and peaceful life, then the Brahmanda Purana says there is no sin as long as you do it for that righteous reason. That is why I have said to you when I did Bhagavad Gita with you, the Mahabharata is always referred to as Dharma Yuddham, the war to re-establish righteousness. That is why, many have asked me, say, brother, Lord Krishna was there. Why couldn't he stop the war? Krishna is also bound by karma. It is not his karma to stop the war. It is his karma to ensure that the war is conducted on just means. And that's what he did. He said, I will not take up arms, but I will serve one of you as your charioteer. And he gave the choice. Remember that one part I referred to when I was doing Bhagavad Gita, I said he called Arjuna and he called Duryodhana. When they went to see him, he was lying down. Duryodhana went and sat beside his head. Arjuna went and sat beside his feet and started massaging his feet. When Arjuna started to massage his feet, Krishna got up and the first person he saw was Arjuna, even though very close to him was Duryodhana seated. And Duryodhana asked, why did you see Arjuna first when I was sitting closer to you? He said, because he is in the position of servitude. You are in the position of masterhood. Those who serve me become obvious to me. Distance is no matter. But those who want to ensure that they are the masters, distance does not matter. Anyway, how close you are to me, you will not be seen. Then he gave them the choice. Right, I can either drive your chariot or you can have my 18 million armies. Yadavasena. Of course, Duryodhana went for it first. He asked Arjuna, you choose. Arjuna said, Duryodhana is my elder brother, I'll let him choose first. Duryodhana thought, what a fool you are, Arjuna. Of course, I'll take your 18 million fantastically trained army. And Arjuna said, Lord, if I have you, I don't need anything else. Now, how many of us can think like that? Lord, if I have you, I don't need anything else. Lord, I want you at the same time. I want that, I want this, I want that, and the other. Right? So we got to, really shapen and sharpen our thinking. Right? So 4 chapters, right? The first one is talking about all the different god forms, or 4 bhagas. Right? It talks about Brahma, it talks about Vishnu, 3 Murtis, 3 Devis, it talks about Ganesha, talks about the Navagrahas, all of that. And it says all of these forms point towards the greater, grander Brahman, right? So chapter 1, by talking about all these gods and telling us that these forms lead to the formless Brahman, right? Again, a point that has been mentioned many times. Right? It also talks about Vedanta philosophy, specifically Advaitam. It talks about the Sankhya and the Yoga schools of the Hindu philosophy, whilst focusing on what I did with you before I started the Purana sessions, Yantra, Mantra, and Tantra. So this is one Purana where you can find focus on that. The second part talks about, of course, the greatness of Lalita Pukhyana. That basically is a summary of the conversation between Hayagriva and Agastya Maharishi. When Agastya asked Hayagriva, why do you want to learn the Lalita's names? And then Hayagriva said, with your permission, can I tell you about why and the greatness of Lalita's names? So, of course, Agastya knew. He just wanted to test the veracity on the part of Hayagriva to want to learn. So why do you want to learn so much? Right? And he then referred to, as in the Devi Mahatmya, he talked about Devi Bhagavatam, how Lalita came, and he talked about her war with the Asura and a final triumph, and how, Navaratri resulted, all of that. And he says, there is nothing more significant than learning the 1,000 names of Lalita. And Agastya blessed him and taught him, Now, other stuff that other materials that this Purana relates to is, for example, the creation of the cosmos. And many times this has happened in different Puranas. But different Puranas, yes, but the fact of the matter is the same, right? How it was created, the cosmology, the cosmogony, a discussion about kalpas, times and dimensions, kalpas and yugas. It also talks about the different dynasties, the Bharata dynasty, the Prithu dynasty, the Deva dynasty, the Rishi dynasty, the Agni dynasty, the Chandra dynasty, right? And it talks about Vedangas, the Kalpas, Adi Kalpas, right? About 20% to 25%, I would say maximum 30%, refers to as Lalita. Refers to Lalita, the grandness of Devi, and of course the benefits of learning Lalita Sahasranamam. I think if time permits and if the divine wills it, I might do one session on the greatness of learning Lalita Sahasranama. What is the significance? How it all came about. That's a special session on its own, because Lalita Sahasranamam is a book in its own right. So there's just no time, and I don't want to do any injustice to it by trying to summarize something as grand as it is. But I said, if it is two things that you need to know, is either, or one of the two things that is said to give you moksha, is either learning and reciting the Lalita Sahasranamam. Any problem in life, by the recitation of Lalita Sahasranamam, it is like fire. It just consumes it and brings it to one level of being. That is how powerful it is. Or the Vishnu Sahasranama. Vishnu Sahasranama. It's another great work, And of course, the history of how it came about is even more powerful. That is the Brahmanda Purana in a nutshell. Anda is the egg in a nutshell. That's what Brahmanda Purana is all about. If you look at the Brahmavaivarta Purana, right, it's again, slightly different from the Brahmanda is talking about the cosmos. Brahmavaivarta, on the other hand, is talking about the greatness of Brahma when realized. Okay, it is people believe that it is more akin to Vaishnavism, but I don't think so. A book is a book. You can't say this book is more important to one class at the expense of another class. So Puranas are Puranas. So it's quite voluminous. Again, it's one of the Mukhya Puranas. First millennium CE. If you're looking at the timeline, right, goes back to first millennium CE. Although subsequent writings have come about later. It's known as I said, Brahmavaivarta Purana, or some places refer to it as Brahmavaivarta Purana. So what this Purana looks at is, again, there are 4 bhagas, right? Each having its own chapter lines. The text is notable for identifying the various God forms, particularly in this sense, Krishna. It focuses on Lord Krishna as the supreme reality, right? Saying that worshipping Krishna will take you to the universal Parabrahman, but it also refers to as other gods like Shiva, Brahma, Ganesha, all are the same, right? It says worshipping this, but the focus is on Krishna as the supreme ultimate reality, right? And perhaps that is why, subsequent scholars, specifically ISKCON, right, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, say the Brahmavaivarta Purana is all about Vaishnavism. Actually, it's not. One part of the book refers to Krishna as supreme reality, but in the same part it says whether it's Krishna, Shiva, Brahma, or Ganesha, you use them to go to the formless, which is Parabrahman. So you see, it's all interpretation, right? So when you read something, make sure you have your own rationality and you can give it some sense of acceptance, some logic. Don't just accept everything you read or everything, people say, including me. It also talks about the Devis. It talks about the three Murtis, it talks about the three Devis, it talks about, Durga, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Radha, Savitri, all these names come in there. And of course, this they refer to as all the male gods are referred to as Purusha, and all the female gods are referred to as Prakriti, right? Purusha is force, Shiva. Prakriti is Shakti, right? So it makes sense. Like I said to you, the atom, proton and neutron, like that. So Devi Bhagavatam talks about the Shakti force. And that is referred to in the Brahmavaivarta Purana. So they give a lot of importance. In last week also I said, where women, females were given a lot of importance when I looked at the Agni Purana. And some of the stories that come out in the Brahmavaivarta Purana owes its existence to the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana. For example, because I said this is focusing on Krishna, they have taken some of the things from Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana, like all the Krishna Leelas or the Rasa Leela stories, right? Now again, Krishna and Radha, right? You don't say Krishna Radha, you say Radhe Krishna. You say Lakshmi Narayana. You say, how do you refer to as Shiva? Gandhadhara. So all the Shakti is given primal position and then only the Shiva. So they say, Shiva Shaktya Yukto Yati Bhavati Shaktaha Prabhavitum Nachedevam Devo Nakala Kushalahalas Panditumabhi Atastwam Haradhyam Harihara Viranjadi Prabhi Pranantum Va Stotum Katamakrita Punya Prabhavati. This is the first stanza in Shankara's great work, Saundarya Lahari, right? Where he talks about the greatness of Shakti. He said, without Shakti, there is no Shiva. Shiva Shaktya Yukto Yati Bhavati. Yeah. So the Brahmavaivarta Purana also says the Radha aspect, the Shakti aspect from the Krishna, the Shiva aspect is inseparable, right? And that is why the Shaktis are referred to as Mula Prakriti. Mula Prakriti means the root nature, the original seed from which all material forms evolve. So Purusha, Prakriti, right? That is the understanding you should have, right? Doesn't matter whether it's Lakshmi or Narayana or Parvati or Shiva or Radha or Krishna or Sita or Rama. The point is, or Valli or Devasena, when you talk about Subramanya, the point is the male aspect of energy is referred to as Prakriti, Purusha, and the female aspect of energy is referred to as Prakriti. Male aspect Purusha equals Shiva, female aspect Prakriti equals Shakti, Shiva Shakti, right? Proton, neuron, there you go, right? So I think I also told you that once, many times, but when you look at one of the forms of Shiva, you have something called Ardhanarishwara. Half of him is male and half of him is female. Now, in this Brahmavaivarta Purana, there is one part that refers to Krishna in the same form, right? I'll come back to that in a while. Many of the performances and culture, cultural education has been influenced by, material from the Brahmavaivarta Purana as well as the Srimad Bhagavatam or the Bhagavata Purana. So things like the legends, the worship, the mythology, the life and times of Radha and Krishna, discussion of ethics, dharma, the 4 stages of life, the 4 houses, the 4 stages, brahmacharya, grihastha, manapadishta, sannyasa, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. All these have been, collectively referred to in the Brahmavaivarta Purana, having taken some other materials or references from the Bhagavata Purana. As I said to you, Bhagavata Purana is also referred to as the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So it also refers to as Tantra. It also refers to Tantra and Bhakti, and also saints that have been attached to Tantric Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Okay, so it's quite what do you call? It's quite broad, if you like, in a sense. Again, some people say before the first millennium, so some people even say 700 CE, right? A version of Brahmavaivarta Purana already existed, but it was not discovered subsequently for another 200-300 years. Then it was discovered. That is why the first one is called Adi Brahmavaivarta Purana, and the second one is called Brahmavaivarta Purana. So it is still there. If you go there to the first Vedic university in the world, which is in Kashi or Varanasi, you can see some of these things there. Not much in terms of perhaps maybe about 8 to 10,000, verses. But subsequently, some of these verses, because of the lack of competent understanding, what you don't understand, you don't want to talk about, isn't it? You only talk about what you understand. So, the version that you currently have, is only about 4,000 verses because everything was taken out, right? So some of the things it talks about is the Varna Ashrama. Varna Ashrama is the caste system, the duties of the Varna, and duties of the Varnas in the various ashramas, stages of life, right? It talks about the theory of heaven and hell. It talks about the theory of life after death. Talks about what is death, right? So a lot of good themes there that can help someone recognize and understand, what you should be thinking about, what you should be doing, how you should be living this life. Particularly, it focuses on two things in all the chapters. It looks at something called upavasa and vrata, right? Vrata, fasting, and for what types of festivals or religious or spiritual occasions that one should be fasting. Okay, so there are 4 khandas, 4 chapters, 4 parts really. Adhyayas are chapters. The first chapter, as I said, talks about how to attain Brahman through the worship of Krishna as the supreme reality, also through the worship of Shiva, Brahma, Krishna, Rama, all these gods, Ganesha, all these gods, right? That's the first khanda. There's about 30 odd chapters there on how to attain Brahman. Then the second part is on Prakriti. So the first one is on Purusha, the second one is on Prakriti, first one on Shiva, second one on Shakti, right? About 67 chapters. And again, it talks about the grandness or the grandeur of Devi. Devi as in Shakti, the form. The third khanda, about 46 chapters, and it focuses purely on the greatness of Lord Ganesha. That is referred to as Ganesha Khanda or Ganapati Khanda. Right? The third khanda of the Brahmavaivarta Purana focuses on Lord Ganesha. Right? And the fourth one talks about the, Shiva Shakti force together. So Radha, Krishna, Lakshmi, Narayana, and all the other God forms. So you have about 274, 276 chapters on the various forms, telling you how to use these forms to go from the form to the formless, from the form to the formless. So of course the earliest versions was much longer. It had about 18,000 verses. But now, of course, it's all fallen smaller or shorter. The Padma Purana categorizes the Brahmavaivarta Purana as falling into the Rajas category, right? Rajas category. Now, many scholars, Sanskrit scholars, consider the division or the reference or the classification of Puranas into Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic as fanciful and merely classifying it without any, proper substantiation, and that they argue that there is actually no justification in this classification. But if you ask me for my own opinion, right, my own opinion is the character of the Purana, right, if it is referred to as Rajas or Tamas or Sattvic, will help the reader overcome his own quality of Rajas or Tamas. If it's Sattvic, to maintain, develop, evolve further. But if he has Rajasic qualities, if he has Tamasic qualities, then by reading the Puranas that have been referred to as Rajasic or Tamasic, it will help the reader overcome his own issues. That's how I look at it. You see, a very simple thing for you to do, right? When you are reading something and when you are taking things, take it in a way that you are telling yourself, this is what will help me. This is what will help me. If when you're reading, you say, this doesn't make sense, this is not going to help me, then no point doing it, because you've already told your mind, this is not helpful, this is not going to aid me in any way. But if you say, very good, this will help me overcome this, this will help me suppress this quality, this will help me develop further, this will help me evolve, then by that mental recitation of that, what we call affirmation, you get there, right? So that's how I look at the three classification of the Puranas as Rajasic, Tamasic, or Sattvic. Apply it to yourself. Then you will see it working. Of course, the Puranas themselves have value in a different sense, right? So they don't have any legal personality or any real personality, human personalities. Therefore, they cannot be said to possess, humanistic qualities or gunas like Rajasic, Tamasic, or Sattvic. So from that sense of rational thinking, yes, they don't have. But if you apply it to yourself, the reader has, isn't it? The reader has three qualities. He's Rajasic, he's Tamasic, he's Sattvic. That will help, right? Now, interestingly, one of the chapters in Brahmavaivarta Purana, as I said to you earlier, Brahmavaivarta means the metamorphosis of Brahman, right? The greatness, the grandness of Brahman. It is the entire universe. The universal consciousness is Brahman. That means what is the grandeur of that Brahman, right? So once there was a conversation between Agastya, Vyasa, and all the Saptarishis, right? They were sitting and they were having a roundtable conference. And they said, what is the best way to test human bhakti so that we know that the bhakti is pure, untainted, and is fit to be moved to the next level so that the merging with the Brahman can be made easy? What is our quality that we are looking for? So they said, we don't know really. I mean, they spoke about many things about dharma, artha, kama, moksha, all of that. And then they said, well, there is no clear understanding here. So let's approach Brahma. So they went to Brahma. And of course, Brahma as a creator, he knows what is happening as the creator. He may have created the thoughts and the debate itself amongst the Saptarishis for them to go to him to ask for a way out. So he was ready waiting. When they were there, he said, 1 minute, let me deal with Kamadeva. Kamadeva is the god of desire. Now I'm coming. And what I'm saying now has reference to what I said 2 days ago in the reflections. I started with the first form of Ashtadosha, which is Kama. And then for the next 7 weeks, I'll be looking at the 7 other types of Ashtadoshas. This is my weekly reflections on Thursdays. Well, so here, again, reference is made to that. Brahma said to Kamadeva, I want you to go to earth. And Kamadeva says, yes, my lord, why? What am I supposed to do there? He says, I am going to give you many weapons. You are to use these weapons on the human beings. And that's all you do. Once you cast your weapon on them, your job is finished. Then look for next person, until you are summoned back, right? Now, some, modern scholars say, the Western version of Kamadeva is Cupid, god of love, Cupid. So Kamadeva is also referred to as god of desire, god of love, right? So Kamadeva asked, what weapons are you going to give me, my lord? So he was, expecting, some trishul or some kind of solid weapons. But Brahma said, I'm going to give you weapons. When you throw this weapon, you will enchant the receiver. When you throw this weapon, the receiver will be stupefied. They become mad. It produces love in a fever form. It can deprive your senses. It can make people go blind with love. So basically, all these weapons is what he's giving. The weapon to enchant, the weapon to stupefy, the weapon to madden, produce fever, sometimes you see movies, you read in books, and you perhaps even have experienced it yourself in some stage in your life where, you fall in love and then you think nothing else is working. I don't want to eat. I don't want to drink. Constantly this thought, I'm in a fever kind of thing, I'm blinded by love, all this. This is all the work of Kamadeva. And Brahma is telling him, go now. And this is your job. Now, all the Saptarishis are there listening to this, right? So instantly they knew Brahma is already giving them an answer even before they post the question. See how fantastic. This is what we call the lining of the thoughts. When you are vibrating at that level, you don't even have to ask. You just channel the thought and the answer will come straight. So then Brahma said, yes, the great Saptarishis are here before me. To what do I owe this great pleasure? They said, we wanted to ask you a question, but then from your conversation to Kamadeva, we've understood that human beings on earth have to learn to control their desire. Only when they control their desire are they fit to be in the stage of bhakti, where the Jivatma can then go to the Paramatma. Brahma said, Tathastu, there you go, that's it. This is actually in chapter 4 of the Brahmavaivarta Purana. Right? Those of you who have access to it, you can read it. So it also talks about, as I said, the greatness or the grandness of the, Brahman concept, where he creates the universe, he is the universe, and he is everything in the universe. That is why always we say Parabrahman, that which is over and beyond, and of course, everything that is contained within. Right? So there are lots of stories there. As I said, the first part refers to the grandness or the greatness of Brahman. The second part refers to as Prakriti, talking about all the female god forms. The first one talks about all the male god forms. Importance, significance is given to Lord Krishna, right? The second part is talking about all Devis. Third part is talking about Lord Ganesha. And the fourth part is talking about Radha and Krishna, talking about the Rasa Leelas, the Krishna Leelas, and all of that, right? So I explained to you Radha, Krishna, Shiva Shakti, right? Proton, neuron, that sort of understanding. Now, earlier I said to you that Krishna has been referred to as Ardhanari in Brahmavaivarta Purana, in the first chapter where it's referring to as Krishna. Now, Ardhanarishwara is something that is attributed to Lord Shiva, where half of him is, males, half of him is female. So you can see the face, even the earring that is worn on either side is different. And then, of course, the dress sense from head to toe is also different. And the Brahmavaivarta Purana refers to this part when it's talking about chapter 4, talking about the greatness of the Shiva Shakti, the Purusha Prakriti aspect, Radha Krishna. It talks about the Ardhanari. So here, Krishna is referred to as Ardhanari Krishna, or sometimes it's referred to as Ardharada Venudharamurti. Ardharada Venudharamurti or Ardhanari Krishna. So it talks about, the balance of the force and the energy, between Purusha and Prakriti. in a human being, right? These two forces exist. Just like good and bad, positive and negative, right and wrong, Purusha, Shiva, Prakriti, Shakti also exists. And there has to be a balance before something, conducive can come out of it, right? So if you go back to some of the early temples, especially in Maharashtra, right, there are some temples where if you go to, Krishna is painted as, or if you see the sculpture, has Ardhanari Krishna. That means half of him as Radha, half of him as Krishna. So it's there, and some of these works, the Ardhanari Krishna related works, have also been translated into Assamese and Tibetan languages. So, and some of these people who've written it have actually been there to see it, and they write it as they are seeing it, or as when they saw it. So that is the greatness or the grandness of the Brahmavaivarta Purana. So they're not big works; they're small works, and hence, they can be summarized to what I have just told you today. Next week is quite important because we are looking at Markandeya Purana and Bhavishya Purana. Bhavishya means something that is going to happen. You must come for this because in Bhavishya Purana, they are actually forecasting or foretelling what's going to happen. What's currently we are experiencing was already told or forecasted in Bhavishya Purana. And of course, Markandeya, you all know, is a great devotee of Lord Shiva. So what is going to happen next week? We will have to attend next week to find out about Markandeya Purana and Bhavishya Purana. Anyada sharanam nasti tvameva sharanam mamaha tasmat karunya bhavena raksha raksha maheshwaraha hari om tat sat. Sai Ram.